Hey guys, so here we are in 3, and we're going to be talking about this thing called macromolecules. We can also call them biomolecules. Sometimes you'll hear them called that, but I usually refer to them as macromolecules. Okay, so anyway, our key concept for this section is carbon-based molecules are the foundation of life. You might hear some thunder out there. It is storming, so please don't mind it. Anyway, our vocabulary is macromolecule, monomer, polymer, carbohydrate, monosaccharides, lipid, fatty acid, protein, amino acid, nucleic acid, and nucleotide. So we have a lot of vocabulary that we're going to cover in this section. And yes, this is a heavily tested section on our EOC at the end of the year. So please, please, please study the section, listen to what I tell you. You're going to be doing a little study guide when you're done. So please make sure you really, really, really study this section. Our main ideas is carbon atoms have unique bonding properties. There are 4 main types of carbon-based molecules found in living things. And our essential questions are: what elements does carbon bond with to make up life's molecules? How do the bonding properties of carbon atoms result in a large variety of carbon-based molecules in living things? And what are the structures and function of each of the 4 types of macromolecules found in living things? So back in the 1800s, chemists actually called compounds created by living things or living organisms organic. Now you don't need to write this part, that's just in the italics here. I just want to give you some history. But today we know that fundamentally the chemistry of living things and non-living things are the same. They only called organic things, organic chemicals, things that were found in living things, but we know that they're fundamentally the same at this point. But we still use the term organic chemistry. And when we talk about organic chemistry, when we get into it, the term organic chemistry really means compounds that contain carbon atoms, okay? So if you study organic chem in a college level class, you're going to study carbon-based molecules. Inorganic chemistry is the study of all other compounds. So my stupid little thing to remember, organic chemistry versus inorganic chemistry is inorganic. We have NO, so INO, but if you circle the NO and then the next part of it is chemistry, starts with a C, we have no C, no carbon-based molecules. In my term organic chemistry, we say the first letter O, and the second part, chemistry, C, we say, oh look, there's a C. If you can remember that, that'll help you remember carbon-based molecules are organic chemistry. Anyway, what elements does carbon bond with to make up life's molecules? So carbon can bond with many, many elements such as hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, nitrogen, and those all form the molecules of life. And carbon is super important because it can bond to itself, and when it bonds itself, it can form these unique molecules, and they can form like really long chains and rings, so it's very unique. So macromolecules, what exactly is a macromolecule? All it really means, macro means giant, okay? And we have molecules, so it's a giant molecule. So when I said carbon can bond to itself to form these really, really, really long chains, well, that's exactly what I mean. Carbon keeps bonding to another carbon, to another carbon, to another carbon, to another carbon, and also to some other things, but it can form these really, really long chains, and it can also form like little ring-shaped structures because of this bonding. So many of the organic compounds found in living cells are so large that we call them macromolecules, or just giant molecules. Now, most macromolecules are made through the process of polymerization, okay? In this, we have small little pieces that all get joined together to form a larger chain. The small units, the small pieces are called monomers, mono, one, right? So monomer is just one piece. Now when we bond all those little pieces together, we call them polymers. Poly for many. So we have many little monomers all joined together to form a polymer. So monomers are the individual subunits. One, mono, all come together to form polymers. Now, carbon atoms have unique bonding properties, and carbon can form covalent. Remember, in covalent bonds, they cooperate, the electrons get shared. So carbon forms covalent bonds with up to 4 other atoms, including other carbon atoms. And carbon-based molecules have a few general types of structure. We can have big, long, straight chains, we can have branched chains, and we can have rings. And I've got some pictures down below there so you can look at them. And again, these can keep building to bigger and bigger and bigger molecules. So again, macromolecules, giant molecules. Now, our macromolecule types in living organisms, we have 4 main types. Okay, and I want you to memorize these. So the 4 main types of macromolecules found in all living things are carbohydrates. You've heard of that before. Lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. And again, you've heard of proteins, you've heard of carbohydrates, so the new words there are lipids and nucleic acids, and you'll know what they are in just a few minutes. So our first things, we have to know some identifying features or how carbohydrates are actually built, okay? So one of the things that you need to remember are carbohydrates are compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they always have this 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Now, one of the things that sometimes they ask you on the EOC is they'll ask you which macromolecule or which biomolecule is made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. If it asks you anything about a ratio, it is a carbohydrate, okay? All the other ones, we don't talk about ratios. So if there's anything saying ratio in it, it's a carbohydrate. Now, we have small little units, the monomers, remember, the little pieces that make up the bigger chain, the bigger polymer. Now, these ones have a special name. We call them monosaccharides. So the small little pieces that make up a carbohydrate are called monosaccharides. And carbohydrates actually includes sugar and starches. So there's some examples for you. So when you eat something that contains sugar in it, you're eating something that's a carbohydrate. If you're eating something starchy, like cereal, bread, rice, pasta, that's all carbohydrates. So when we talk about monosaccharides, or the little pieces, the little monomers that make up our macromolecule, they're very simple sugars, okay? And you can see each one little green shape there is a monosaccharide. Now they build bigger things called polysaccharides, right? Poly for many. So one monosaccharide joins to another one to make this macromolecule carbohydrate. We have monosaccharides, the simple ones, and then polysaccharides being more complex. Now, what's the whole point of carbohydrates? Like, what do we use them for? What's their function? Well, living things use carbohydrates as their main source of energy. Think about it. You eat a bunch of sugar, what happens? You get a ton of energy, and sugar is a carbohydrate. This is also why, like before a big football game or before any athletic event, your coach wants you to do this thing called carbo load, where you eat a big bowl of pasta, you eat a bunch of rice, you eat some kind of really starchy thing, and that helps to give you energy for the big game. So carbohydrates, whatever they are, turn into sugar in the body. You've also heard of like the keto diet, where people don't want to eat carbohydrates because they don't want to eat a lot of sugar, okay? So that's the whole point. You eat carbohydrates that turn into sugar in your body, and you use the sugar as your main source of energy. We even have some carbohydrates being part of our cell structures, and we'll talk about that later in future chapters. Lipids. Okay, you know what a lipid is. I'm going to explain it a little further. So lipids are made of mostly carbon and hydrogen atoms, and they're made up of smaller monomers. Remember those little pieces, those little monomers. We have a special name for them called fatty acids. Okay, and here's some examples. Lipids are nonpolar molecules that include fats, oils, and cholesterol, all right? So lipids are really just fats and oils, all right? And just know that they're made up of small units. If you can remember their fats, they're made up of small units called fatty acids. And in general, they're not soluble in water, which means they don't mix. You know that. Oil and water don't mix, okay? Fats don't mix with water. Now, fats and oils have different fatty acids. We have some things that are called saturated fatty acids and some things that are called unsaturated fatty acids. Now, our saturated just mean they have single carbon bonds, okay? You don't really need to know that. Unsaturated have double bonds, but just know that fats and oils have different fatty acids. Okay, we have saturated and unsaturated. What is the whole purpose of fats? All right, we need fats, we really do, but generally fats are used to store energy. Okay, so like Ms. Bishop here has a little extra pounds. That's because I'm storing that fat for later. I'm storing it for future use to burn it later as a source of energy. So lipids can be used to store energy. Now, some lipids are important parts of biological membranes, like little pieces that surround parts of our cells and surround different things. They can make up like earwax, waterproof coverings, our oil that gets secreted from our skin. These are all lipids, okay? Also, some fats, you actually need to have some fats to help you absorb vitamins and minerals, and some of them are actually used to make hormones in our body. Okay, and we're also going to talk about, when we talk about the cell membrane, how it's made up of some of these lipids. But just for our purposes, remember, lipids are fats, and we all store fats for later use, so we use them as a storage for energy usage later. Next thing, proteins. Proteins are molecules that contain nitrogen as well as carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And they're actually really super big macromolecules, very large polymers made from smaller monomers. Now, we have a special name for these monomers, and we call them amino acids. And I'm going to tell you right now, please remember, proteins are made out of amino acids. You'll be asked that like a million times on the EOC, probably more than once, I can guarantee, even for your midterm exam from the school district. You might be asked it 3 times. What's the subunit that makes up proteins? It's an amino acid. You might be asked, what macromolecule is built from amino acids? Remember, it's protein. Okay? They might even ask you, what are the building blocks of proteins? And it's amino acid. So several times I'm telling you, please memorize, proteins are made from amino acids. Now, there's a wide variety of proteins because proteins are made from these amino acids, and we have 20 amino acids found in nature, and they can all join with different amino acids to make different proteins. Okay, so there's an example of one structure of protein. Now, all proteins differ in side groups or things called R groups. So if you look at this and they give you an example with this picture, and you see this R there. If you see the R, remember it's a protein. Okay, PRO, protein has an R group. Our amino acids are connected or joined together through these things called peptide bonds. Okay, peptide bond, amino acid joined together to form a protein. And proteins differ in the number and the order of their amino acids, and amino acids actually interact to give protein its shape. Now, proteins do a ton of different things in our body, so proteins are probably the most important macromolecule in our body. And incorrect amino acids can actually change a protein's structure and its function, the job that it's supposed to do. Now, some of the things that they do are controller traits, like you actually have a protein in your hair that codes for your hair to be either curly or straight. Okay, and you can denature or change the shape of that protein by getting a perm or relaxing your hair. Some proteins control the rate of reactions and regulate cell processes, so they're actually telling the cells what to do. And some proteins form important parts of our cells. Proteins do a ton of different things, and I think one of the most important things is actually control our traits that we have. And then we also have proteins transporting substances in or out of our cells, and some of them actually even help us fight diseases. So proteins, super important. Please don't forget they're made out of a monomer called amino acid. Sometimes we call them subunits, building blocks, whatever you want to call them. The small pieces that make up a protein are called amino acids. Okay, our last one is nucleic acids. And nucleic acids are made up of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus. And nucleic acids are made out of smaller monomers called nucleotides. This one's a little bit easier to remember because nucleic acid and nucleotide sound alike, they go together, same beginning of the word. And here's some pictures there for you. Those are the nucleotides joined together to form our nucleic acid. Now, nucleotides are made out of 3 parts, and yes, you do need to remember these 3 parts. So the 3 parts that make up a nucleotide are sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. Okay, so nucleotides made out of 3 parts, and nucleotides make up nucleic acids. Now, some of the functions of nucleic acids. They actually store and transmit our hereditary or genetic information. Okay, and you have 2 things that you know about. You know about DNA. DNA stores our genetic information. Okay, that's a nucleic acid, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. The N and the A stand for nucleic acid. And then we have ribonucleic acid, RNA. And RNA actually builds proteins, and we'll get into that in future chapters. And again, proteins were super important. Okay, now in our RNA, ribonucleic acid, NA stands for nucleic acid. So I hope you all can remember that so you can get that right on the EOC. So functions, they store and transmit our hereditary or genetic information. Some examples are DNA and RNA. Okay, so the last thing you guys need to do is make sure you look over these essential questions, make sure you can answer these, and then move on to the next assignment where you're actually looking at the structure. So you're going to tell me the structures of the macromolecules. You're going to tell me their functions and then give me some examples. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.